Why was everyone staring at the woman folding laundry? The violent hiss of steam cut through the morning air at Fort Clay. Metal clanged against concrete. The industrial laundry facility hummed with its usual rhythm, but something was about to shatter that routine, something that would change how 30 people understood courage. Take that uniform off, right now. Lieutenant Blake Harrison's voice sliced through the humid air like a blade. It was 600 hours. His face flushed with the kind of anger that comes from catching someone in what he believed was a grave offense, a crime, an insult to everything he held sacred. Grace Miller stood perfectly still in the center of the massive laundry room, her 45-year-old frame neither defensive nor apologetic. The woodland camouflage uniform she wore had seen better days. The pattern was from 2003. Colors faded from years of washing. A small patch near the left shoulder showed where fabric had been carefully mended. Her brown hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in a regulation bun. It seemed out of place for someone who spent her days surrounded by industrial washing machines and the acrid smell of military-grade detergent. Her hands rested calmly at her sides, weathered hands, marked by chemical burns from years of handling harsh cleaning agents. But there was something about those hands, something in the way they held themselves, steady, controlled, almost surgical in their stillness. Around her, the morning shift came to a complete halt. 20 people froze, young soldiers picking up their cleaned uniforms, civilian contractors loading machines, even a few NCOs grabbing coffee from the break room, all turned to witness the confrontation. The rhythmic churning of washing machines created an oddly tense soundtrack, like a heartbeat. You have no right to wear the uniform of the United States military. Harrison stepped closer. His West Point ring caught the fluorescent lights. His pressed ACUs looked factory new compared to Grace's worn attire. Everything about him screamed authority, privilege, the confidence of someone who'd never been truly tested. You're a laundry technician. This is stolen valor. This is disrespecting every real soldier who earned the right to wear this. Grace's eyes moved slowly from Harrison's face to the pile of uniforms she'd been processing. Blood-stained ACUs from wounded warriors just transferred from Walter Reed Medical Center. Dark patches of dried blood marked where tourniquets had been applied, where medics had cut through fabric to save lives. She said nothing, simply turning back to her work, lifting another bloodied uniform with the kind of reverence reserved for folding a flag. The silence felt dangerous. "I'm talking to you." Harrison's voice rose another octave. Behind him, 5 young soldiers had begun to gather, drawn by the drama like moths to flame. Private Rodriguez, built like a linebacker with arms that strained against his uniform sleeves, laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yo, who does Grandma think she is, playing dress-up?" The crowd laughed, some uncomfortable, others feeding off the cruelty like oxygen. But none of them knew, none of them understood, that in exactly 20 minutes, when superheated steam would turn this orderly facility into a nightmare of scalding vapor and panic, they would discover why this quiet woman had kept her old uniform for 20 years, and why some warriors never truly leave the battlefield. The morning had started like any other for Grace Miller. She'd arrived at 5:30 hours, 30 minutes before her shift officially began, just as she had every day for the past 5 years. The industrial laundry facility at Fort Clay processed over 500 uniforms daily, everything from basic ACUs to dress blues, but Grace always started with the same task: the bloodied uniforms from the medical transports. Rodriguez moved to block her path as she tried to return to her station, his 220 pounds of muscle creating an intimidating wall. "Hey, I asked you a question. You deaf or just stupid?" He looked back at his buddies for approval, getting encouraging nods from the growing crowd. Specialist Chen had her phone out, already live streaming to her 3,000 followers. "Oh my God, you guys have to see this," she narrated with the kind of cruel excitement that social media had turned into currency. "We got ourselves a wannabe veteran alert. This cleaning lady really thought she could just throw on a uniform and pretend to be one of us." Grace carefully folded the bloodied uniform she was holding, using the same precise military corners she'd been using long before any of these young soldiers had been born. Her movements were economical, practiced, each fold exactly 8 inches, creating perfect rectangles that would make any drill sergeant nod in approval. She placed it gently in the special care pile, uniforms that belonged to Purple Heart recipients, requiring extra attention to remove blood while preserving the dignity of what they represented. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. "That uniform isn't even regulation anymore," Private First Class Martinez chimed in, his technical knowledge his only claim to authority in the group. "That woodland pattern was phased out in 2005. Where'd you even get this? Army surplus store, eBay." He circled Grace like a prosecutor examining evidence, pointing out every non-standard element. "Look at those boots. Old style, probably picked them up at a thrift shop." Specialist Thompson, wiry and mean with the kind of small man complex that manifested in petty cruelties, accidentally knocked over Grace's cart of cleaning supplies. Industrial-strength detergent splattered across the floor, the sharp chemical smell immediately filling the air. "Oops," he said with mock innocence. "Guess you better clean that up. That's what you're good at, right? Cleaning up after real soldiers." Private Walker, newer to the group but eager to fit in, pulled out his phone to call security. "I'm reporting this. This is probably illegal, right? Impersonating military personnel. My dad said people go to jail for this." His voice carried the uncertainty of someone who wasn't quite sure of his facts, but was committed to the performance. The crowd had grown to 30 people now, a mixture of expressions ranging from amusement to discomfort. Some laughed openly, others shifted uneasily. A few watched with the kind of careful attention that suggested they were seeing something the others were missing. Grace continued working, her silence more provocative than any response could have been. It was the silence that seemed to infuriate Harrison the most. He was used to confrontation, to people defending themselves, making excuses, backing down. Grace did none of these things. She simply continued her work, handling each bloodied uniform with the same careful attention, checking labels for special instructions, pre-treating stains with a precision that seemed almost medical. "Sergeant Barnes," Harrison called out as a stocky NCO entered the facility for his morning pickup. "Sergeant, we have a situation here. This civilian is wearing a military uniform without authorization." Barnes had 15 years in service, 2 deployments to Afghanistan. He looked from Harrison to Grace, then to the crowd of soldiers that had formed a semicircle around the confrontation. His weathered face showed the exhaustion of someone who'd seen too much actual conflict to be impressed by garrison drama. "What's the problem, Lieutenant?" "This laundry technician," Harrison gestured dismissively at Grace, "is wearing a military uniform. It's stolen valor, Sergeant. She needs to remove it immediately or face charges." Barnes studied Grace more carefully now, something in her posture, the way she held herself despite being surrounded. It triggered a memory he couldn't quite place, but the pressure of 30 watching eyes and a lieutenant's direct statement pushed him toward the path of least resistance. "Ma'am, you need to remove that uniform. It's against federal law to impersonate military personnel." Grace looked at him then, really looked at him. Her eyes held something Barnes hadn't expected, not fear, not shame, something else entirely, something that made his stomach tighten with the first whisper of doubt. She reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately, the gesture making several soldiers tense. What was she pulling out? Evidence, identification, a weapon. A photograph. Worn, creased from being handled thousands of times. The image showed a younger Grace, maybe 25 years old, standing with a team of sailors, all wearing what looked like specialized gear. Behind them, a ship, the USS Liberty Dawn, and in Grace's hand, barely visible in the faded photo, was something that made Barnes' blood run cold. A phoenix pin, the kind that was never officially issued, the kind that only existed in whispered stories, in classified briefings that made flag officers go pale. "Where did you get that?" Barnes' voice had changed, the authority replaced by something between confusion and dawning horror. Grace didn't answer. She simply returned the photo to her pocket and went back to folding uniforms. But now Barnes saw what he'd missed before: the way she moved, the economy of motion, the situational awareness that never let her turn her back to a threat, the hands that looked weathered from chemicals but held themselves with the muscle memory of someone who'd done far more than laundry. Rodriguez, emboldened by the crowd, reached out to grab Grace's shoulder, to physically force her to respond. His hand never made contact. Grace's movement was so fast, so precise, that most people missed it. One moment Rodriguez was reaching. The next, he was stumbling backward, his wrist bent at an angle that made everyone wince. Not broken, but controlled, redirected with the kind of technical expertise that came from thousands of hours of training. "Don't touch me," Grace said quietly. Her first words since the confrontation began. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. The kind of steel that gets forged in places where failure means death. The facility went completely silent. Even the washing machine seemed to pause. Rodriguez cradled his wrist, shocked more than hurt. Chen's phone captured everything. 3,000 followers watching live as their entertainment turned into something they couldn't quite understand. "I'm calling the MPs," Harrison said, pulling out his phone, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "This is assault now, battery of a soldier." "Make the call," Grace said, still folding uniforms, still treating blood-stained fabric with reverence. "But you might want to check my employee file first, Lieutenant. Specifically the section that requires Level 5 clearance to access." Harrison froze. Level 5 clearance. That was reserved for personnel files containing classified information, black operations, stuff that civilians shouldn't even know existed. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. Grace looked up at him then, her eyes holding his with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step back. "Am I? What could one woman possibly have done to earn Level 5 clearance?" The question hung in the air like smoke, 30 people watching, waiting, the tension so thick you could taste it. Harrison's finger hovered over his phone, but something stopped him from completing the call. Some instinct that whispered he was about to make a career-ending mistake. "Check the file," Grace said again, her voice still quiet, still calm. "Or don't. Either way, I have work to do." She turned back to her station, but everyone noticed something different now. The way she moved through the facility, the way she assessed angles and exits, the way her eyes constantly tracked movement without seeming to look directly at anyone. These weren't the habits of a laundry technician. These were the ingrained behaviors of someone who'd operated in environments where a moment's inattention meant death. Barnes pulled out his own phone, his hands shaking slightly as he navigated to the secure personnel database. His security clearance was high enough to access basic files, but when he entered Grace Miller's name, he hit a wall, a bright red warning that made his heart sink. "Access DENIED. Level 5 clearance required. Unauthorized inquiry logged and reported to command." "Oh God," he whispered. "Lieutenant, we need to leave now." "What? No, this woman is above your pay grade, sir." Barnes' voice carried the weight of someone who just realized they were standing in a minefield. "We need to go, all of us, right now." But it was already too late. The facility's main door opened. A full-bird colonel strode in. Not just any colonel. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, base commander. Behind her, two CID agents in civilian clothes, and bringing up the rear looking decidedly uncomfortable was the base's chief of security. The crowd of soldiers scattered like startled birds. Chen nearly dropped her phone trying to stop the live stream. Rodriguez suddenly found his wrist didn't hurt quite so much. Harrison stood at attention so fast he almost gave himself whiplash. Colonel Mitchell walked straight to Grace, ignoring everyone else, her face unreadable. When she reached the laundry station, she did something that made every jaw in the facility drop. She saluted. A crisp, perfect salute, holding it until Grace, moving slowly, returned it with the same precision. "Chief Miller," Mitchell said formally, "I apologize for the disturbance to your work." Chief, not ma'am, not Miss Miller, chief, a naval rank, but Grace was working at an army base, in an army facility. None of this made sense. "No apology necessary, Colonel," Grace replied, her voice still quiet, but now everyone could hear the authority underneath, the voice of someone who'd given orders that determined whether people lived or died. These young soldiers were just doing what they thought was right. Harassing a Medal of Honor recipient, Mitchell's voice could have cut glass. Assaulting a decorated combat veteran, live streaming classified personnel information. The blood drained from Chen's face. Harrison looked like he might vomit. Rodriguez stood frozen, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Medal of Honor. The words echoed in the sudden silence. The highest military decoration. Only 3,517 people had ever received it since the award was created in 1861, and one of them had been washing their blood-stained uniforms. "I didn't display my medal," Grace said calmly, "and I didn't advertise my service. I was wearing my old uniform because—" She paused, her voice softening with something that might have been memory or might have been pain, "because today is the anniversary. 20 years since the Liberty Dawn incident." Mitchell nodded, understanding passing between the two women, something the young soldiers couldn't begin to grasp. "The Liberty Dawn," Barnes whispered, his face going pale. "Oh God, you're her, you're the Phoenix Chief." The Phoenix Chief, a legend in Navy SEAL circles, a ghost story told to recruits. The story went like this. 20 years ago, a naval engineering chief had been aboard the USS Liberty Dawn when a catastrophic engine room fire broke out during a covert operation. The fire spread to the armory. 54 sailors trapped below decks. No way out. Temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. The automatic systems had failed. Manual override was impossible because the valves were in the heart of the inferno. One person had gone in anyway. Chief Grace Miller, at the time a 25-year-old engineering specialist with 3 years of service. She'd crawled through spaces filled with superheated steam, her protective gear melting against her skin. She'd manually shut down 17 valves while the ship burned around her. 17 valves that each required 3 minutes of sustained exposure to lethal temperatures. The math alone should have killed her, but somehow she'd saved 54 sailors. Pulled 37 of them out personally, while suffering burns over 40% of her body. The Navy had tried to give her the Medal of Honor immediately. She'd refused, said she was just doing her job. They'd insisted, made it a ceremony with press coverage, turned her into a symbol, a hero, everything she'd never wanted to be. So she'd done what every photo showed but what people misunderstood. She'd smiled for the cameras, accepted the medal, gave the speeches, and then she disappeared, transferred out, requested the most boring, mundane posting she could find, spent 20 years avoiding attention, avoiding recognition, just working, just serving in the smallest, quietest way possible. Washing blood from uniforms. Thompson, who'd knocked over her cleaning supplies, looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Martinez, who'd mocked her old uniform, couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Chen's 3,000 followers were getting an education in humility that none of them would ever forget. "I need to see the recording," one of the CID agents said to Chen. his voice flat, professional. All of it, including whatever you've already posted. I deleted it, Chen stammered, which was a lie and everyone knew it. I mean, I can get it back, I didn't mean. Now, specialist. While Chen fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock it, Grace returned to her work, picking up another bloodied uniform, checking the label. This one belonged to Private First Class Michael Williams, 22 years old, wounded in a rocket attack, burns across his chest and arms. His uniform told the story in the pattern of scorched fabric and the smell of antiseptic from the burn unit. Grace's hands moved with practiced care, treating Williams's blood with the same reverence she'd shown every uniform before it. Because to her, this wasn't just fabric. This was a testament to courage, a record of sacrifice, and it deserved to be handled with dignity. Chief Miller, Harrison finally found his voice. It cracked halfway through her name. I'm sorry, I didn't know. No, Grace said without looking up. You didn't, but you should have asked before you assumed, before you humiliated, before you turned cruelty into entertainment. I understand if you want to press charges. I don't. Grace finally looked at him, her expression neither angry nor forgiving, just tired. But you need to understand something, Lieutenant. Everyone in this facility has a story. Everyone you meet is carrying something you can't see. The janitor might be a former intelligence officer. The gate guard might have saved lives in combat. The quiet person folding laundry might have done things that would give you nightmares. She gestured to the pile of bloodied uniforms. These soldiers deserve your respect, not because of their rank, not because of their awards, but because they served. They bled. Some of them died. And the least we can do, the very least, is treat their sacrifice with dignity, even when that service is as simple as making sure their uniforms are clean, making sure their families don't receive their clothes still stained with blood. The facility was utterly silent. 30 people learning a lesson that no classroom could teach, that no training manual could convey. That sometimes the most profound courage looks nothing like what we expect. I want to show you something, Grace said. She walked to a secured cabinet at the back of the facility, used a key she kept on a chain around her neck. Inside was a shadow box, a memorial, photos of sailors, 54 faces, young men and women who'd survived that day on the Liberty Dawn. This is Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez, Grace said, pointing to one photo. Not related to you, Private, but same last name. He was trapped in the engine room with his entire crew, burns over 60% of his body. I pulled him out, but he died 3 days later in the hospital, held on just long enough to tell his wife he loved her. She moved to another photo. Petty Officer Sarah Chen, 21 years old. She lived, got married, had 3 kids, sends me a card every year on the anniversary. Same last name as you, specialist. Chen's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she realized she'd been mocking the woman who'd saved someone with her own name. Private First Class David Martinez. He was the youngest person on that ship, 18 years old, had been in the Navy for 6 months. I carried him through a corridor that was literally on fire. His uniform melted to my hands. He survived, became a doctor, spends his time now in VA hospitals treating wounded veterans. Grace's finger moved across the shadow box. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, Specialist Amanda Walker, Sergeant Patricia Harrison. At the last name, Lieutenant Harrison's knees nearly buckled, his face going white as chalk. Your father, Grace asked gently. Uncle, Harrison whispered. He died when I was 5, house fire. He ran back in to save my cousin. I never knew he served on a ship. He did, Grace said softly, and he was brave then too. I pulled him from the Liberty Dawn with degree burns covering his arms. He survived. Went on to marry your aunt, had 2 children, and when that fire happened 15 years later, he didn't hesitate, because that's what we do. We run toward danger, not away from it. The moral weight of her words settled over everyone like a blanket, heavy, inescapable. I wear this uniform, Grace continued, her hand touching the faded woodland camouflage, because 20 years ago today I failed. Out of 54 sailors in that engine room, I only saved 37. 17 died. 17 people I couldn't reach in time. 17 families who buried their loved ones because I wasn't fast enough, strong enough, good enough. But you saved 37, Barnes said, his voice thick with emotion. 37 people who lived because of you. And I remember all 17 who didn't. Grace's voice finally broke, just for a moment. A hairline crack in the armor she'd maintained for 2 decades. Every uniform I clean, every bloodstain I remove. It's my way of honoring them, of serving the people I couldn't save by serving everyone else who comes through these doors. She looked around at the faces watching her, young faces, soldiers who'd thought they knew what courage looked like, what service meant. Stolen valor, Grace said quietly. I wish it was. I wish I could take this uniform off and become someone who'd never seen what I've seen, never lost what I've lost. But I can't, because those 17 sailors are with me every day. And the only way I know how to honor them is to keep serving, keep working, even if it's just washing blood from fabric. The facility's alarm suddenly blared, a harsh, metallic shriek that made everyone jump. Red lights began flashing. The temperature gauges on the main boiler wall showed numbers climbing into dangerous territory. Steam pressure building beyond safe limits. System failure, one of the facility managers yelled. We need to evacuate now. The massive industrial boilers that powered the entire laundry facility were going critical. Steam pressure building, temperature rising. In approximately 3 minutes, if the manual override wasn't engaged, the boilers would explode. Superheated steam would flood the building. At those temperatures and pressures, it would strip flesh from bone. Everyone ran for the exits, 30 people scrambling, panicking. The CID agents pulling Mitchell toward safety, the young soldiers pushing past each other in their desperation to escape. Everyone except Grace. She walked, didn't run, toward the boiler room, her stride purposeful, steady. The same walk she'd used 20 years ago when she'd entered an inferno to save 54 sailors. Chief, no, Mitchell yelled. We can't lose you again. But Grace had already disappeared into the steam. Would anyone follow the quiet woman into hell? The question hung in the superheated air. 29 people stood outside the facility, safe, watching through reinforced windows as Grace Miller walked into what should have been certain death. The boiler room temperature was already exceeding 500 degrees, steam pressure building. The automatic systems had failed, just like on the Liberty dawned 20 years ago. Barnes was the first to move. Not thinking, just responding to something deeper than thought. The recognition that real courage looks like a woman calmly walking into fire. He grabbed a fire proximity suit from the emergency locker, started pulling it on. What are you doing? Mitchell demanded. Someone has to help her, Barnes said, his hands shaking as he zipped the suit. Someone has to. I'm going, Rodriguez's voice cut through. The same private who'd laughed at her minutes earlier, who'd called her grandma. He was pulling on a second suit, tears streaming down his face. My uncle, Chief Rodriguez. She tried to save him. I'm going. I'm coming too. Chen, still holding her phone, but now recording for a different reason. Documenting not mockery but heroism. We all go, Martinez, Thompson, Walker, Harrison, each pulling on protective gear. Each understanding that in the span of 15 minutes they'd gone from humiliating this woman to being willing to die with her. Inside the boiler room, Grace moved with the precision of a surgeon. The heat was immense, the kind of heat that made breathing painful, that turned air into knives. But she'd felt this before, 20 years ago, and her body remembered what to do even when her mind screamed to run. Valve 1, 3 full turns. Her hands protected by the old uniform sleeves and her own scarred skin that had learned to tolerate temperatures that would disable others. The pressure gauge dropped slightly, but not enough. Valve 2, 5 turns, her vision blurring from the heat, sweat evaporating as fast as it formed, but her hands stayed steady. Because 17 sailors hadn't had steady hands, they'd had her hands, and her hands had failed them. Not today. Valve 3, 7 turns, the emergency override, but it was stuck, seized from years of poor maintenance. She needed more force, more strength. The kind of strength that shouldn't exist in a 45-year-old woman's chemical-burned hands. But somehow it did. The valve turned, screaming metal, protesting, then giving way. The pressure began to drop, temperature falling, crisis averted. Grace sagged against the wall, her vision darkening, the heat finally overwhelming even her trained tolerance. This is how it ends, she thought, not on a burning ship, but in a laundry facility, somehow fitting. 20 years of washing blood from uniforms, 20 years of penance for 17 failures. Jiva. Rodriguez was there, impossibly, his protective suit smoking from the heat, his face visible through the visor, tears still streaming. "I've got you, just like you had my uncle, I've got you." Barnes appeared on her other side, Chen behind them, all of them forming a chain, human courage linking together, carrying her out of the heat, out of the steam, back to the world of normal temperatures and breathable air. They laid her on the concrete outside, her old uniform scorched but intact, her skin red but not burned. The Phoenix chief had walked through fire twice in her life, and survived both times. Mitchell was beside her instantly, checking vitals, calling for medics, but Grace waved her off. "I'm fine," she said, her voice rough from the superheated air, just like old times. The medics arrived, checked her over, concluded that somehow, impossibly, she had no serious injuries. The same conclusion doctors had reached 20 years ago, as if Grace Miller existed in her own category, someone who walked through fire and emerged singed but not broken. Chen's phone had captured everything, the walk into the boiler room, the young soldiers donning protective gear to follow her, the rescue, the return. Her 3,000 followers had grown to 30,000, then 300,000. The video was going viral, not as mockery this time, but as testament. "Why?" Harrison asked. He was sitting beside Grace now, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "You didn't have to go in there, you're not even on duty as an engineer, you're laundry staff." "Because that's what we do," Grace said simply. "We serve. Whether it's pulling sailors from fire or washing blood from uniforms or walking into a boiler room because no one else has the training, we serve where we're needed." She struggled to her feet, waved off the medics trying to make her sit, walked back into the now-safe facility, back to her station, back to the bloodied uniform she'd been folding when this all started. Private First Class Michael Williams's uniform, still waiting, still needing care. "The thing you all need to understand," Grace said as she picked up the uniform, her hands steady despite what she just endured, "is that service isn't about glory. It isn't about recognition. It's about showing up, about doing what needs to be done, whether that's running into fire or folding laundry. Both matter. Both honor the people who bleed for this country." Rodriguez approached slowly, his earlier mockery replaced by something like awe. "Chief, my uncle, Chief James Rodriguez, he was your responsibility that day, wasn't he?" Grace nodded. "He was, and I failed him." "No," Rodriguez's voice was firm, strong. "You gave him 3 more days, 3 days to tell my aunt he loved her, 3 days to hold his newborn son, me. I wouldn't exist if you hadn't pulled him from that fire. My 3 sisters, my father's whole life. It exists because you ran into hell and dragged my uncle out." His voice broke. "You didn't fail him. You gave him everything that mattered, time, dignity, love, and you've been honoring him ever since, washing uniforms, treating blood like it's sacred. You've been serving his memory for 20 years. Grace looked at the young private, saw his uncle's eyes, the same shape, the same intensity, and for the first time in 20 years she felt something shift. Some weight she'd been carrying, not gone, but different, lighter somehow. "Thank you," she whispered. The facility slowly returned to normal, the boilers cooling, the emergency systems resetting, but nothing would truly be normal again, because 30 people had learned something that would change them forever. That courage doesn't always announce itself, that heroes don't always wear medals on display, that sometimes the most profound service comes from the quietest places. Chen sat editing her video, not deleting it, but adding context, adding Grace's story, the Liberty Dawn, the 17 who died and the 37 who lived, the 20 years of penance through laundry, the walk into fire for a second time. "I'm calling it the Phoenix Chief," Chen said, "if that's okay with you." Grace shrugged. "Call it whatever you want, just make sure people understand. This isn't about me, it's about them." She gestured to the pile of bloodied uniforms. "Every single one of these soldiers has a story. Every one of them deserves respect. That's the only message that matters." The video went global, 10 million views, then 50 million. News outlets picked it up. Veterans groups shared it. The story of the Medal of Honor recipient who'd spent 20 years washing blood from uniforms, who'd walked into fire twice, who'd taught 30 soldiers what real courage looked like. But Grace Miller didn't watch any of it. She was too busy working. Another shift, another day, more uniforms to fold, more blood to wash away, more service to render in the smallest, most humble way possible. Because that's what the Phoenix Chief did. She served, not with fanfare, not with recognition, just with steady hands and a heart that had learned the hardest lesson of all. That sometimes the greatest courage is simply showing up, day after day, doing the work that no one notices, honoring the dead by serving the living. What makes a hero choose shadows over spotlight? The question lingered in the days that followed. Grace Miller's story had exploded across the internet. News crews showed up at Fort Clay, requests for interviews, documentary producers, book deals. Everyone wanted to talk to the Phoenix Chief. Everyone wanted to understand the woman who'd won the Medal of Honor and then disappeared into a laundry facility. Grace declined them all. She continued her routine. 5:30 arrival, 30 minutes before her shift, starting with the bloodied uniforms from medical transports, working through her day with the same methodical care she'd shown for 5 years. The only difference was how people looked at her now. Soldiers stopped to thank her. NCOs saluted. Even the base commander made a point of visiting the facility daily. But Grace treated them all the same, with quiet respect, with dignity, without seeking anything in return. Lieutenant Harrison had requested a transfer, his shame too great to remain on base. But Grace had personally called his commanding officer and asked that the request be denied. "He learned something important," she'd said, "and he'll be a better officer because of it. Don't punish growth." Rodriguez had started volunteering at the laundry facility, coming in during his off hours, helping Grace process uniforms, learning from her, not just about how to remove bloodstains or fold with military precision, but about service, about humility, about carrying the weight of those who came before. "My uncle would have liked you," Grace told him one day. They were working side by side, processing a particularly difficult batch from a bombing incident. "He had your sense of humor, your energy. When he laughed, everyone laughed." "Tell me about him," Rodriguez said softly. And Grace did. For the first time in 20 years, she talked about Chief James Rodriguez, about his love of terrible jokes, his skill with engineering, the way he'd stayed calm during the fire even when everyone else panicked, how he'd helped organize the evacuation even while burning, how his last words had been to tell Grace to save the others, to forget about him, to get them home. "I didn't forget," Grace said, her voice thick with memory. "I pulled him out last. 17 sailors died waiting for rescue, but he lived. 3 more days, and in those 3 days he got to meet you. Hold you. I've always believed that was God's way of telling me that even failures can contain grace. Rodriguez wiped his eyes. He saved my life by giving his, and you saved his life long enough to make that possible. That's not failure, Chief. That's a miracle. Chen had become obsessed with documenting veteran stories. Her social media had transformed from entertainment to education. She interviewed wounded warriors, shared stories of military families, used her platform to raise money for veteran causes, all because of one day watching Grace Miller walk into fire. "You changed my life," she told Grace during one of her facility visits. "I thought service was about glory, about looking tough, about getting recognition. You taught me it's about none of those things." "Service is about others," Grace replied simply. "The moment you make it about yourself, you've missed the point." But something was coming, something Grace had known would eventually arrive. 3 weeks after the boiler incident, she received an encrypted message on her phone, the same kind of message she'd been ignoring for 5 years. Phoenix team recalled. Situation critical. 3 SAILORS confirmed alive. 15 years captivity. Your PROTOCOLS sustained THEM. Immediate consultation required. Grace stared at the message for a long time. Her hands, scarred from saving lives, roughened from cleaning fabric, trembling slightly. 3 sailors, alive, from the Liberty Dawn, the mission that had gone south after the fire. 3 of her team captured during extraction, declared dead after 5 years, memorial services held, families notified. But they'd been alive all along, and her training, the Phoenix protocols she'd drilled into every team member, had kept them alive. 15 years in captivity, 15 years of waiting for rescue, 15 years of believing their chief would never abandon them. "I have to go," Grace said to Colonel Mitchell the next day. They were meeting in the base commander's office, away from prying eyes. "3 of my sailors are alive. They held on because I taught them to hold on. I can't abandon them now." Mitchell nodded. She'd expected this. "The team is being reformed. Best operators from SEAL Team 6. They want you as consultant. Your knowledge of enemy interrogation protocols, your understanding of the Phoenix survival methods. You won't go in, but you'll guide the team." "When?" "Tonight, flight to Virginia, then classified briefing. You'll be gone approximately 4 weeks." Grace thought about the uniforms waiting in the facility, about the blood she'd been washing away, about the quiet service she'd been rendering for 5 years. But she also thought about 3 sailors who'd believed in her for 15 years, who'd held on to hope because she'd told them to never quit. "I'll need someone to cover my station," Grace said. "Already arranged." Sergeant Barnes volunteered, said he learned from the best and wants to honor that. That evening, Grace stood in the empty laundry facility, her domain of steam and soap and bloodied fabric. She'd come to love this work, the simplicity of it, the honesty, no politics, no glory, just service in its purest form. But 3 sailors were waiting, and the Phoenix chief never abandoned her team. She changed out of her laundry coveralls and into a clean uniform, not the woodland camouflage from 2003, but a current Navy working uniform, the one she was authorized to wear but rarely did. On the collar, she pinned something that had been locked in her security box for 20 years. The Phoenix pin. Small, unassuming, but carrying the weight of a legend, the symbol of a team that had operated in shadows, that had completed missions no one could know about, that had saved lives while the world slept. Rodriguez found her there, standing among the washing machines, lost in thought. "Chief, you okay?" "I have to leave," Grace said, "for a few weeks, maybe longer. Some of my old team. They're alive, they need me." Rodriguez's face showed understanding and pride. "Then you should go. We'll take care of things here. Barnes taught me the proper way to handle the medical transport uniforms. Chen's been learning the pretreatment protocols. Thompson's been studying how to properly fold for families. We've all been learning. from you. This facility will be fine because you taught us what matters, not the work itself, but why we do it, how we honor the people who bleed. Rodriguez stepped forward and did something that surprised Grace. He saluted, sharp, precise. "Chief Miller, Phoenix Chief, go save your sailors, we'll hold the line here." Grace returned the salute, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders again. After 5 years of setting it down, after 20 years of trying to leave it behind. But some burdens we carry not because we want to, but because we must. The flight to Virginia was smooth. Grace spent it reviewing files, learning everything about the 3 sailors who'd survived 15 years of captivity. Webb, Torres, Kim, all from her original Phoenix team, all captured during the extraction after the Liberty Dawn fire, all declared dead, all alive. The enemy had interrogated them relentlessly, tortured them for information, but they'd given nothing, using the techniques Grace had taught them, the mental compartmentalization, the resistance protocols, the Phoenix methodology that treated the mind as a fortress and every question as a battle. "They kept asking about you," the intelligence officer briefed her. "About the Phoenix Chief, about your location, your identity. They wanted to know everything, but your 3 sailors gave them nothing. 15 years of interrogation, 0 compromise." Grace felt something tighten in her chest. Pride, grief, guilt. Her training had kept them alive, but it had also kept them in hell. If they'd broken, if they'd talked, maybe the enemy would have released them. Maybe they'd have come home. "Don't think that way," the officer said, reading her expression. "If they'd talked, they'd have been executed. The enemy keeps people alive only as long as they have value. Your sailors knew that. They chose survival. They chose to believe you'd come for them." The rescue operation was launched 72 hours later. Grace wasn't on the extraction team. She was too old, too far removed from active operations. But she was in the operations center, wearing a headset, listening to every communication, guiding the team with her knowledge of Phoenix protocols. "Remember," she told the SEAL commander leading the mission, "Webb was always claustrophobic. If he's in a confined space during extraction, talk to him. Use his wife's name. Sarah's waiting will center him. Torres had nightmares about water. If there's a water crossing, let him know it's shallow, that he can touch bottom. Kim loved terrible jokes. If you need to connect with him, tell him one. It'll remind him he's going home." The SEALs looked at her with something approaching reverence. This woman knew her team, even after 15 years. She remembered not just their training but their fears, their loves, their humanity. The extraction was textbook. 23 minutes from breach to exfil. 3 emaciated sailors carried out by operators who treated them like precious cargo. 0 enemy casualties. Clean operation. Perfect execution. Grace watched the helicopter feed as her sailors were loaded aboard. Webb, Torres, Kim, barely recognizable, their bodies wasted from years of inadequate food, their eyes hollow from trauma, but alive. When Webb was placed in his litter, the medic leaned close and whispered, "Sarah's waiting." Webb's eyes opened, focused, and he smiled. After 15 years of hell, he smiled. Torres tensed during the helicopter ride, PTSD triggering at the sound of the rotors, but the crew chief, following Grace's guidance, showed him the water below. "Shallow, brother, you can touch bottom, we're almost home." Torres relaxed, closed his eyes, let himself believe. Kim was unconscious, too weak to respond, but the SEAL commander played a recording Grace had prepared, her voice, telling a terrible joke. "Why don't Navy SEALs ever play hide and seek? Because good luck hiding when you're this handsome." Kim's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, recognition that his chief had come for him. Grace wept. For the first time in 20 years, she let herself cry, not tears of grief, but tears of overwhelming relief. 3 sailors home, 3 failures erased from her ledger. Her count dropped from 17 to 14. The reunion happened at Walter Reed Medical Center. Webb, Torres, and Kim had been stabilized, fed, given initial medical care, but they'd asked, demanded, to see their chief before anything else. Grace entered the room wearing her uniform, the phoenix pin visible on her collar. The three sailors struggled to sit up, to salute, but she waved them down. "At ease, sailors, you've done enough." Webb spoke first, his voice raspy from 15 years of minimal use. We knew you'd come, you taught us. Phoenix never abandons the mission." "I'm so sorry," Grace said, kneeling beside his bed, taking his hand. "I'm so sorry it took 15 years. I should have." "You taught us to survive," Torres interrupted. "Every day, every interrogation. We used your protocols, your methods. We stayed alive because you trained us to stay alive." "And we knew," Kim added, his voice barely a whisper, "that if anyone could find us, it would be you. The Phoenix Chief. The woman who walked through fire for 54 sailors. We were just 3 more. 3 more reasons to keep walking into flames." Grace stayed with them for hours, talking, sharing stories, learning about their 15 years in hell, how they'd supported each other, how they'd maintained military discipline even in captivity, how they'd made each other laugh with terrible jokes because their chief had taught them that humor was a weapon against despair. "We have families now," Webb said. "Sarah waited. She raised our daughter alone, told her I was dead, but she never removed her wedding ring, never stopped hopping." "My parents held a memorial service," Torres added. "Buried an empty casket. My mom visited the grave every week for 10 years. This is going to destroy her, in the best possible way." "I had a boyfriend," Kim said softly. "Before I was captured, he married someone else, has 3 kids. I don't blame him, I was dead, but I still thought about him, every day, wondered if he remembered me." Grace listened, absorbed their stories, carried their pain, because that's what a chief did. You carried your sailors' burdens, you held their trauma, you made space for their healing. "You're not going back to the laundry facility, are you?" Webb asked after a long silence. "They need you, the Phoenix team. They want to reform it, use your methods to train a new generation." "No," Grace said firmly. "I'm going back to Fort Clay, back to the washing machines, back to the bloodied uniforms." "But why?" Torres sounded confused. "You're a legend. You could write your own ticket, train operators, consult for SOCOM. Why waste your skills washing laundry?" Grace smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in weeks. "Because those uniforms belong to soldiers who bleed, who sacrifice, who need someone to treat their sacrifice with dignity. I can train operators anywhere. But right now, Fort Clay has soldiers who need their clothes cleaned by someone who understands what those bloodstains mean, who honors them properly." She stood, straightened her uniform, looked at each of her 3 sailors. "You survived 15 years of hell. You held on to hope because I taught you to hold on. Now I'm asking you to do one more thing. Live, really live. Go home to your families, heal, laugh, love. Make your lives so full of joy that every day you spend in captivity becomes a distant memory overshadowed by decades of happiness." Webb saluted from his bed. Torres followed. Kim, too weak to lift his arm fully, touched his fingers to his forehead. "Aye, Chief, Phoenix always completes the mission." Grace returned their salutes, then walked out of Walter Reed, back to reality, back to her chosen service. 4 weeks later, she returned to Fort Clay. The laundry facility had continued operating. Barnes had kept meticulous records. Rodriguez had maintained her standards. Chen had documented everything. Thompson had even improved some of the pretreatment processes. But when Grace walked through those doors at 5:30 hours, 30 minutes before her shift, everything felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight she'd carried for 20 years had finally eased. She pulled on her coveralls, tied back her hair, walked to her station, and picked up the first bloodied uniform of the day. Private Daniel Morrison, 23 years old, IED blast, shrapnel wounds. The blood told its story in small splatters, quick bleeding, Field dressing applied successfully, he'd survive. Grace folded his uniform with the same care she'd always used, the same reverence, the same recognition that this blood was sacred, but now she did it with something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Peace. Her count was at 14. 17 sailors had died on the Liberty Dawn, but 3 had just come home. 14 remained. 14 names she carried. 14 reasons to keep serving. Rodriguez found her there an hour later, working methodically through the medical transport uniforms. "Welcome back, Chief." "Thank you, Rodriguez. How'd the facility run while I was gone?" "Barnes made me clean the same uniform 3 times until I got the fold right. Chen lectured me about proper stain treatment. Thompson actually smiled once. It was terrifying. We survived." Grace laughed, a real laugh, the sound surprising both of them. "You learned well. We had a good teacher." They worked side by side, chief and private, legend and student, both understanding that service came in many forms, both honoring the blood on fabric with the same care they'd give to a fallen comrade. "Chief," Rodriguez asked after a while, "your sailors, Webb, Torres, and Kim, they really survived because of what you taught them." "They survived because they were strong, because they believed, because they never gave up." "No," Rodriguez said firmly. "They survived because you gave them something to hold on to, a reason to believe rescue was coming. That's what real leadership is. Not orders, not tactics, but giving people a reason to keep fighting when everything says to quit." Grace considered his words, thought about 15 years of captivity, about 3 sailors holding on, about the Phoenix protocols she drilled into them, about faith that someone would come. "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe we all just do what we're trained to do. We serve. We hold the line. We keep showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Chen posted a follow-up video, 3 million views in the first hour. It showed Grace back at Fort Clay, working quietly, folding uniforms. The caption read, "This is what a hero looks like. Not medals and glory, just steady hands and faithful service." The Phoenix chief chooses laundry over fame, and that choice teaches us more about courage than any battle story ever could. The video went viral, again, but this time Grace didn't ignore it. She recorded a short response, her voice calm, measured, the voice of someone who'd carried impossible burdens and somehow found peace. Those are everywhere. The nurse working a double shift, the teacher staying late to help a struggling student, the parent working 3 jobs to provide for their family, the soldier bleeding for their country, the person folding their clothes with dignity. We all serve. Some of us just do it more quietly than others. That doesn't make it less important. It just makes it less visible. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the greatest service is the kind no one sees. The kind done simply because it needs doing. Not for recognition, not for reward, just because someone has to care, someone has to remember, someone has to honor the blood. The message resonated, millions of people sharing it, teachers, nurses, veterans, parents, all recognizing themselves in Grace's words, all understanding that their quiet service mattered. Lieutenant Harrison visited the facility 1 month after Grace's return. He looked different, humbler, more careful in how he carried himself. "Chief Miller, I wanted to apologize again, and to thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me what I should have learned at West Point but didn't. That leadership isn't about authority, it's about service. You could have destroyed my career. Instead, you protected it. Why?" Grace continued folding the uniform in her hands. Private Jennifer Anderson, burn victim, healing well according to the medical notes. "Because you learned something important that day, and because destroying you would have served no purpose. We don't tear people down for mistakes. We help them grow from them. That's what real leaders do." Harrison nodded, swallowed hard. "I've been volunteering at the VA, visiting wounded veterans, listening to their stories, trying to understand what you already knew, that every person has value, Every person has a story worth hearing. That's good, Lieutenant. Keep doing that. Let their stories change you. Let their courage inspire you. And when you lead soldiers someday, remember this. They're not numbers on a roster. They're human beings with families and fears and dreams. Treat them accordingly. Harrison saluted. Grace returned it. And in that moment, a young officer learned more about leadership than 4 years at West Point had taught him. The facility returned to its rhythm. Uniforms in, uniforms out, blood washed away, fabric folded with care. Grace worked her shifts with the same dedication she'd always shown, but now others worked beside her. Rodriguez, Chen, Thompson, Martinez, even Barnes stopped by when he could. They'd all learned something from the Phoenix chief. That service doesn't require recognition. That courage often looks like quiet persistence. That the greatest battles are sometimes fought not with weapons but with steady hands and faithful hearts. Grace's phone still received encrypted messages, mission requests, consultation offers, Phoenix team reformation proposals. She declined them all, not because she couldn't help, but because she'd chosen where she was needed most. Here, among the washing machines and bloodied fabric, honoring sacrifice one uniform at a time. Webb called sometimes, from his home where Sarah had waited 15 years, where his daughter, now 16 years old, was learning about the father she'd thought was dead. "Chief, you saved my life twice, once in that engine room fire, once by teaching me to survive captivity. How do I repay that?" "You live, Webb, you love your family, you make every day count. That's how you repay me. By making your life so full of joy that my sacrifice, everyone's sacrifice, feels worthwhile." Torres sent postcards from his parents' home where an empty casket had been buried, where a memorial stone bore his name and dates. He'd had it changed, added born 1985, died 2008, resurrected 2023, lived fully thereafter. "Living fully, Chief, just like you ordered." Kim struggled more, PTSD, depression, the trauma of 15 years in darkness, but Grace talked to him weekly, reminded him that survival was a process, that healing took time, that the phoenix didn't rise instantly, it took time to rebuild from ashes. "You're rebuilding, Kim, day by day. That's all any of us can do." 1 year after the boiler incident, Fort Clay held a small ceremony. Not for Grace. She'd refused any official recognition, but for the laundry facility itself. A memorial plaque honoring all the military laundry workers who'd served over the years. The unsung heroes who processed millions of uniforms, who treated blood with dignity, who honored sacrifice in the most humble way possible. The plaque read, "In recognition of those who serve in silence, who wash away blood but never forget the warriors who shed it. Here, service is measured not in medals but in clean fabric and careful hands. Here, every uniform tells a story, and every story matters." Grace stood at the unveiling, surrounded by soldiers she'd taught, by people whose lives she'd changed, not through dramatic rescues or heroic missions, but through quiet example, through showing up every day, through treating every bloodied uniform as a sacred trust. "Thank you for coming," she said simply, her speech brief, understated, exactly what everyone expected from the Phoenix chief. "This facility represents everything I believe about service. It's not glamorous, it's not celebrated, but it's necessary. And necessity is its own form of nobility. Every person who works here understands something profound, that taking care of others, in whatever form that takes, is the highest calling, whether you're pulling people from fire or washing their clothes. Whether you're leading missions or folding fabric, service is service, honor is honor, and dignity is measured not in what we take but in what we give." She paused, looked around at the faces watching her. "Someone once asked me why I chose laundry over glory, why I picked washing machines over missions. The answer is simple. I chose need over want, I chose service over self, and I chose to honor the fallen by caring for the living. That's all any of us can do. Find where we're needed, show up, do the work. and trust that somewhere, somehow, our small acts of faithful service ripple outward in ways we'll never see but that matter more than we'll ever know. The ceremony ended. People returned to their duties. The facility resumed its rhythm. And Grace Miller, the Phoenix Chief, Medal of Honor recipient, Legend of Naval Operations, went back to washing blood from uniforms. Because that's what heroes do. They serve, quietly, faithfully, without need for recognition. They show up. They do the work. And they trust that their example, their choice to honor others above themselves, plants seeds that will grow in gardens they'll never see. That night alone in the facility during the late shift, Grace pulled out the old photograph. The one showing her younger self with her Phoenix team. She looked at the faces. 54 sailors. 17 crossed out. 3 recently restored. 37 still alive. Scattered across the country, living their lives, making families, building futures. She added 3 small check marks. Webb Tours Kim home, alive, thriving. Her failure count stood at 14. 14 names she carried. 14 reasons to keep serving, but also 40 reasons to keep believing. 40 lives saved. 40 families intact. 40 futures made possible. Not bad, she whispered to the photograph, to the ghosts of sailors past, to the memory of flames and steam and impossible choices. Not perfect, but not bad. She placed the photograph back in her locker, returned to her station, picked up another bloodied uniform, Staff Sergeant Michael Rivera, gunshot wound, Purple Heart recipient. His blood told a story of courage and pain and sacrifice. Grace folded his uniform with reverence, with care, with the understanding that this fabric was holy, that this blood was sacred, that this soldier, like all soldiers, deserved to have his sacrifice honored, even in something as simple as clean clothes. The washing machines hummed their familiar rhythm. The steam hissed softly. The fluorescent lights cast steady illumination over a space where ordinary work became extraordinary service. And Grace Miller, the Phoenix Chief, served, not with fanfare, not with glory, but with steady hands and a faithful heart, proving every day that sometimes the greatest courage is simply showing up, doing the work, honoring others, and trusting that quiet service matters more than loud acclaim. Because dignity doesn't demand attention, courage doesn't require recognition, and true service asks for nothing but the chance to care for others, one uniform at a time, one bloodstain at a time, one act of faithful reverence at a time. Some flames never truly die. They just burn differently, in laundry facilities and hospital corridors, in quiet moments and humble tasks, in the steady work of hands that honor blood not with words but with action, with service, with the simple, profound choice to care when no one's watching, to serve when no one's applauding, to love when no one's keeping score. That's the lesson of the Phoenix Chief. Not that heroes wear medals, but that heroes wash clothes, that they fold fabric with reverence, that they treat others' blood as sacred, that they serve not for glory but for the simple reason that someone must. Someone has to care. Someone has to remember. Someone has to keep the faith that every sacrifice matters, every service counts. Every quiet act of dignity ripples outward in ways we can't measure but that change the world nonetheless. And sometimes, just sometimes, that someone is a woman in a laundry facility with weathered hands and a faithful heart, proving every day that heroism isn't always loud, that courage isn't always visible, that service asks for nothing but the chance to honor those who bleed, one uniform at a time, forever, faithfully, without end.